Jonathan Roumie on The Steve Harvey Show. When Jonathan Roumie stepped onto the set of The Steve Harvey Show, the atmosphere buzzed with electric energy. The audience was eager not just for the humor or celebrity charm, but for the presence of a man who had played one of the most sacred roles on a screen and somehow made it feel real. Steve, with his trademark smile, greeted the moment with open warmth and his usual stack of question cards. But something changed the moment Jonathan sat down. His eyes caught the gentle glint of the cross on Steve's chest. Time paused, air thickened with meaning. What started as a lighthearted celebrity interview was about to transform into something far deeper. In the next few minutes, Steve Harvey wouldn't be the one driving the conversation. He'd be the one trying not to cry. And it all began with Jonathan's quiet, unexpected opening. "Steve, I want to share something I've never said on television before." Steve had walked out moments earlier in a sleek gray suit, the crowd roaring with applause. "Today," he'd announced with excitement, "we've got someone special, someone you may know from The Chosen, someone whose portrayal of faith shook the world, Jonathan Roumie." The cheers rose again as Jonathan appeared in a navy blazer, calm and smiling, though a trace of heaviness lived behind his eyes. Steve chuckled and nudged. "Now this guy, he's played Jesus. At your age, I was just trying to survive stand-up and eat 3 meals a day." The crowd laughed. The energy was playful, effortless. But as the lights softened and the laughter faded, Steve leaned in, eyes sharper now. "Jonathan," he said, "you've touched people with your work. But playing Jesus? That's not just acting. That's pressure, man. Tell me, how do you carry that weight in this world we're in?" Jonathan gave a soft, knowing smile. His voice was calm but sincere. "Steve, I didn't grow up in Hollywood. I never imagined I'd be portraying Jesus for millions. But I always believed that if I surrendered to something bigger than myself, something good could come through." There was something humble in his tone, like a man still figuring it out. Steve nodded slowly, instinctively brushing the cross hanging over his chest. "That kind of faith, it's rare out here. But let me ask you something more personal," Steve said, leaning in again. "You're in a place where millions look at you. Some even idolize you. Do you ever feel like maybe you're not enough for all that?" Jonathan hesitated for a second. His smile softened, his hands folded in his lap. "Every day, Steve, there's always a voice whispering, 'You're not holy enough. You're just an actor. You're going to fail.' And sometimes I believed it. I felt like a fraud." The studio grew quiet. Steve's expression turned thoughtful. "I know that voice," Steve said, his thumb unconsciously grazing the cross again. "It told me I wasn't smart enough to be anything but funny. But what gets you through it? What keeps you standing?" Jonathan's eyes lit up, not with ego, but clarity. He leaned forward slightly. "Part of the answer, Steve, is you." There was a shift. The audience stirred. Steve raised an eyebrow. "Me?" he asked, leaning in, surprised. Jonathan nodded, his voice growing steadier, his gaze fixed. "Yeah, there was a night years ago when I was lost, not in career but in purpose. I'd just gotten off a project. The applause was there, but I felt empty. I questioned whether what I was doing meant anything. I turned on the TV that night just looking for noise, and there you were." He paused. The stage lights dimmed as if the moment itself had taken center stage. "It wasn't comedy. It was you talking about life, about faith. You said, 'If you're still breathing, God's not done with you.'" Jonathan swallowed. His voice dropped, now thick with emotion. "Steve, you didn't know it, but that night those words pulled me out of something dark. You reminded me that I was still here for a reason, and it changed me." Steve sat still, his fingers now gripping the question cards like an anchor. "Wait," he said, voice shaking slightly. "You serious?" Jonathan nodded slowly. "Dead serious. And if you'll let me, I'd like to tell you how it saved me and how it shaped what I'm doing now." Steve took a deep breath, the smile fading from his lips, replaced by a look of raw curiosity and quiet emotion. "All right," he said, his voice warm and low. "I'm listening." He gently set his question cards aside, as if silently accepting that from this moment forward, there'd be no more scripts, just truth. Steve Harvey sat still, his hands relaxed on his knees, his eyes locked on Jonathan Roumie. The usual grin was gone, replaced by something deeper, something sacred. The studio audience quieted. No more laughter, just stillness, as if everyone knew they were about to step into the soul of a man who had once faced the edge of himself. Jonathan took a breath. His hands were clasped together, knuckles pale from tension. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but heavy, not with fear, but memory. Steve, you asked what keeps me standing, and to answer that, I need to tell you about a night I wasn't sure I could keep going. Steve leaned in, gently nodding. It wasn't after a big failure, not in the eyes of the world at least. I wasn't running for Congress or on the front page of anything. But inside, I was crumbling. Jonathan paused, his eyes fixed somewhere in the distance. I had just come off a big project. Everyone said it was a success. The Chosen had taken off. I was being recognized in public, praised online. But when the camera shut off and I was alone, I felt completely empty. Steve's expression softened, recognizing the weight behind those words. Fame doesn't fill the holes, he said quietly. No, it doesn't, Jonathan replied, voice trembling. There was a night, I remember it vividly, when I sat on the couch in my small apartment, the lights off, no sound except for the rain tapping the windows. And I was thinking, what is all this for? Do I even belong here? Am I fooling everyone, even myself? He lowered his gaze as if momentarily reliving it. You see, Steve, I'm just a regular guy. I didn't grow up expecting to be on TV. I never chased celebrity, but suddenly people saw me as a symbol of something sacred, and I felt like I was failing them, like maybe I was just pretending. The audience sat in silence, a few people bowing their heads. It wasn't just Jonathan's voice they were hearing. It was the echo of their own inner battles. Steve sat up straighter, his hand reaching once again for the cross on his chest, not out of habit, but instinct, as if grounding himself in something bigger. Jonathan, he said, his voice deep and gentle, you're not the only one who's felt that. Jonathan looked up at him, eyes brighter now, but still shaken. I didn't get past it right away, he said. I thought about quitting and not just the role, the whole thing, acting, faith, everything. I stopped answering calls. I didn't want anyone to see how lost I was. My friends were worried. I shut them out. A beat of silence. Then he continued, almost whispering. One night, I turned on the TV, not to watch anything specific. I just needed noise, distraction, something. And then I saw you. Steve blinked, caught off guard. Me? He asked, sitting forward. What do you mean? Jonathan smiled gently, eyes still clouded with emotion. I don't remember exactly what show it was. Maybe an old clip. You were on stage, not doing comedy. You were talking about life, about faith. And you said, failure isn't the end, it's what shapes us. The words hung in the air like a hymn. The studio lights seemed to dim slightly, as if giving space to the moment. Steve, I was sitting on that worn-out sofa, feeling like a fraud, and for the first time in days, a little bit of light came through. Steve leaned forward, hands braced on the table, his eyes locked on Jonathan. You're serious? He asked, his voice shaky. Dead serious, Jonathan said, firmer now. I don't know when you said it or who you were talking to, but that night it felt like you were speaking to me. You said, we don't have to be perfect, we just have to keep moving. Jonathan paused, his throat tightening. I was crying, Steve, not from sadness, from the realization that I didn't have to pretend anymore, that maybe I still had purpose. That night, everything started to change. The audience was frozen, some with tears in their eyes. A silence had descended, not from shock, but reverence or drama. Steve looked at him, the playful spark long gone, his voice barely above a whisper. You have no idea what that means to me, man. But how did it change you? Jonathan met his gaze. His voice this time carried weight, truth. It gave me the strength to stand back up, not as someone perfect, but as someone real. I stopped chasing the image others had of me. I started grounding myself in what mattered again. Prayer, purpose, truth. And I knew I wasn't meant to fade. I was meant to serve. Steve sat still, his hand gripping the cross tightly, lips pressed together as though holding back something raw and rising. I don't know what to say, he whispered, his voice breaking. Jonathan Roumie smiled, soft, genuine, and glistening with tears that he no longer tried to hide. You don't have to say anything, Steve, he said, because you have already said enough. I'm just here to thank you. Steve remained quiet, overwhelmed. The crowd could feel it. This wasn't just television anymore. This was soul meeting soul. Jonathan's eyes locked with Steve's. No longer just a guest looking at a host, but one man acknowledging another for unknowingly pulling him out of the dark. His voice came low but sure. You have to understand this, Steve. That night when I heard you speak, I wasn't hearing a comedian. I was hearing someone who had walked through pain, just like I had. Someone who'd bled hope into the air and left it there for anyone desperate enough to catch it. Steve leaned forward, his hand leaving the cross and resting flat on the table. as if trying to bridge the distance between them. "You're serious?" he asked again, still shaken. "I mean, I say those things because I need to remind myself, but I didn't think it could reach someone like you." Jonathan nodded, a gentle, unwavering smile rising. "That's exactly why it reached me, Steve. You didn't preach. You weren't trying to impress. You just spoke from your gut, from your scars. I'd cut myself off from everything, friends, work, even my prayers. But your voice, it was like a spark in the middle of the dark. And I cried, not from despair, but because, for the first time in weeks, I believed I still had something left to give." The audience sat still, many wiping their faces. The lights overhead felt softer, more sacred. A television studio was suddenly a sanctuary. Steve straightened slightly, his thumb now stroking the cross as if drawing comfort. "So, what did you do after that?" he asked, voice deeper, steadier, needing to know this story didn't end with just hope. Jonathan smiled, and this time it was full of life. "I started over, not like in the movies, no heroic leap, just small steps. The next morning, I opened my blinds, let the light in, I called my family. I said, I'm not okay, but I'm trying. I started writing again. I prayed, Steve, really prayed, like a son talks to his father. And from that, everything began again. Slowly, honestly." Steve shook his head in disbelief, a small, stunned smile playing on his lips. "You've got me stunned, Jonathan. I'm just a comedy guy, man. I didn't think I could affect someone like you. A man of faith, changing lives." Jonathan tilted his head and looked at him firmly, his voice unwavering. "But that's the thing, Steve. You're not just comedy, you're truth. You speak from your soul. And that's what people remember. That's what I remembered when I had nothing left to hold on to. You were the one who gave me hope when the spotlight felt like a prison. You made me believe I could keep going, and I did." Steve looked down, eyes shimmering, his fingers tightening around the cross again. "Jonathan," I thought he said, voice cracking, "I wear this because it keeps me grounded. But I never imagined it would matter this much to someone else." Jonathan smiled, the tears flowing freely now. "It matters more than you know, Steve. You changed me. You gave me the strength to keep fighting when I wanted to disappear. And now you've changed how I see the whole world." Steve sat quietly, trembling hands still on the cross. The air in the studio wasn't heavy with sadness. It was dense with something holy, the kind of silence that follows a testimony. "You've got me all choked up," Steve said, trying to laugh through the emotion. "I want to hear more." Jonathan leaned in, his eyes lighting up with purpose. "I'll tell you more, Steve, because this story, it isn't just about me. It's about you, about what you bring, without even realizing it." Steve Harvey sat there, breath uneven, as though swept into the eye of a spiritual storm. Jonathan Roumie's words echoed within him, like a divine echo from a place he hadn't realized still needed healing. The audience was silent. Even the lights seemed to dim in reverence. Then Jonathan's voice came again, low but fierce. "Steve, I didn't come here just to thank you for the past. I came to tell you that you are the spark, the one lighting a path for people like me, and for people still out there, wandering, thinking they're forgotten. When I want to quit, when the pressure gets too loud, I think of you. Not a clip, not a quote. You, the way you stand, the way you get back up every time life tries to bury you." Steve let out a broken laugh, tears falling freely now. "You've got me crying too much, Jonathan," he said. "I'm just a storyteller. How am I worth all this?" Jonathan leaned forward slightly, his voice reverent. "Because you lived it, Steve, and because you never stopped telling the truth." Jonathan shook his head slowly, gaze unwavering. "You're worth it, Steve, because you're real." His voice didn't shake now, it carried calm fire. "You don't stand on that stage pretending. You bring your scars, your doubts, your whole story, even on screen, even through clips. Every time I see you, I feel it. And where I work, where everything's chaos, where egos burn and headlines twist truth, I hold on to that." He leaned forward, voice cracking with tenderness. "When the world tries to rip me apart for what I believe, for who I choose to be, I remind myself, Steve Harvey slept in his car. Steve Harvey was rejected, and he's still here. So I can be here too." Steve leaned back, one hand covering his mouth. Tears slipped from his eyes and hit the table. The audience started sobbing openly. Some hugged each other. Some simply bowed their heads in reverence. "You don't know what you're doing to me," Steve whispered, voice trembling. "I never thought I'd be someone people looked to." Jonathan leaned in, his voice swelling with passion. "But you are, Steve. Don't you see I'm not the only one? There are thousands of young people, doubted, discarded, told they're broken, who don't give up. Because they saw you, they don't need to know your number. They know the cross you wear. They've heard you say, get back up, and they believe they can too. Steve took a deep breath, his shoulders rising with the weight of it all. But why me? He asked, voice nearly a plea. There's people out there smarter, better. Why me? Jonathan smiled, his eyes wet but clear. Because you don't try to be perfect, Steve. You never have. You show your bruises. You wear that cross like it's fused to your heart. When you talk about faith, I don't hear performance. I hear truth. Truth from a man who's fallen, who got back up. Steve bowed his head. His hands covered his face, shoulders trembling with thoughts he could no longer hold in. You've got me crying now, he said, laughing weakly through the tears. I've never seen myself like this. Jonathan nodded, voice thick with feeling. But I see you, Steve, and I want you to know, you didn't just give me strength to stand. You gave me strength to fight for others. He took a breath, and something deeper lit in his eyes. When I walk into rooms full of case agents, critics, when I see fame chew people alive, when I see people like Ezra Miller publicly unravel because no one anchored them in truth, I think of you. Steve's eyes flickered up. Jonathan continued, I don't say that with judgment, Steve. I say it with heartbreak, because I know what it's like to be this close to losing yourself. But faith is what held me when the spotlight didn't. Not a loud faith, not a platform, just a belief, like your cross, enough to whisper, you're not alone. Steve couldn't take it anymore. He stood, arms wide, like he wanted to embrace Jonathan's whole world. Tears poured down his face. The audience sat still, no clapping. The moment was too sacred. Steve walked forward, voice choked. You don't know what you've done, he said, pulling Jonathan into a tight embrace. I'm just Steve, but you're making me feel like I'm something more. Jonathan wrapped his arms around him. His voice was soft in Steve's ear. You are more, Steve. You're the spark. For me, for all of us. I'll never forget. They pulled apart. Steve's eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling, but he didn't wipe the tears. He wore them like his cross. The audience, too, was frozen in awe. Even the air itself seemed to hum with reverence. Then Jonathan turned to him again, his voice no longer just emotional, but mission-filled. Steve, you didn't just change me. You changed what I'm doing, right now. Steve blinked. His hand instinctively left the cross and steadied itself on the table, like bracing for something heavy. What do you mean? He asked, his voice raw. You just made me cry. Now what else you got for me? Jonathan gave a small laugh, gentle but charged. I want you to hear this, because it started with you. When I got through that dark time, when I stood back up, I didn't just stand up to keep working. I stood up with a new purpose. The audience murmured, feeling the energy shift again. Jonathan took a breath. His voice was now clearer than ever. After hearing you talk about not giving up, about how God chooses ordinary people for extraordinary things, I started seeing my work differently. I wasn't just meant to play a role. I was meant to fight for people the world overlooks. Young actors, troubled creatives, the ones who are almost Ezra, lost, spiraling, unheard. Steve tilted his head. What are you saying, man? Jonathan looked him straight in the eye. I've started something. It's not public yet, but I'm working on a project, a program to give young creatives real support. Not just money, meaning, mentorship, faith. I call it Second Light for the ones who feel like their light already went out. And Steve, it exists because of you. Steve sat up straighter, his eyes wide and glistening. Hold on, he said, voice trembling with surprise. You're saying you're doing something big, and it came from me? Jonathan nodded slowly, eyes shining. That's right, Steve. He took a breath, hands steady now, not in nervousness, but in purpose. This project isn't public yet, but I can tell you what it is. It's a program, something that I'm building, for young creatives and actors who feel forgotten, who have talent but no connections, who carry trauma but not attention. It's called Second Light, and it was born the night I heard you say, if you're still breathing, God's not done with you. I thought, if I got a second chance, then those kids out there deserve one too. And Steve, you're the one who planted that seed. The audience couldn't hold back anymore. Applause erupted. Not the kind that interrupts, but the kind that lifts. Emotional, real. Steve's hand went to his mouth, eyes wide as tears spilled freely again. Jonathan, he whispered, voice breaking. What did you just say? You took my words and turned them into a mission? Jonathan laughed through tears, wiping his cheek. I didn't just take your words, Steve. I took your spirit, the spirit of not giving up, of believing that everyone matters, even the ones who are breaking in silence. He leaned in, voice thick with gratitude. I've watched people in this industry unravel because they didn't have that. I've seen them fall under the weight. People like Ezra. Steve blinked. Ezra. Jonathan nodded solemnly. Ezra Miller is a name we know, and we all watched his collapse like it was entertainment. But that could have been me. It almost was. A man gifted, hurting, spiraling with no anchor. What if someone had whispered, "You're still breathing," to him, Steve? That's what this program is. A whisper to the wounded. A second light for those who think their first one already went out. Steve bowed his head. His hand clutched the cross again. Not just in emotion, but in reverence. "You don't know what you have done to me," he said, voice choked. "I'm just a guy on TV. I never thought anything I said could touch something like that." Jonathan leaned closer, eyes glowing with steady fire. "But you did. And I want you to know, every time I step onto a set, every time I counsel a broken kid, every time I fight to get Second Light launched, I remember you. I remember your words. I remember that cross. You didn't just change me, Steve. You're changing a generation through me." Steve looked up, his eyes red, but now holding something new. A light, a knowing. "You've melted me down again," he said, voice raspy with emotion. "But Jonathan, you talk about the younger generation. What do you think they need most? I mean, you're building something big here. What do they need to make it?" Jonathan didn't hesitate. They need someone to believe in them. They need to hear that failure isn't the end, that being lost doesn't make them worthless, that you can fall and still rise again. And they need to see someone actually living that out. He pointed at Steve gently. "That's what you gave me. Not politics, not philosophy, faith. And that's what I'm trying to give back." Steve shook his head slowly. His hand trembled on the cross as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. "You just took me to a whole new level," he whispered. "I don't know what else to say except thank you. Thank you for showing me that what I do actually matters." Jonathan smiled, tears still flowing. "No, Steve, I'm the one who needs to thank you. Because to me, you're not just a host. You're the man who gave me and my generation a reason to believe we can do it." The audience clapped again, this time louder, stronger, like a tide of gratitude crashing forward. Steve looked at Jonathan. His eyes still glistened, but now they held something deeper. Not just pride, but peace. Jonathan Roumie's revelation that Steve Harvey's words inspired a program to catch the falling and light up the forgotten echoed across the room. This wasn't an interview, it was a calling. Steve took a breath, trying to steady his voice. "Jonathan," he said, tone hoarse but glowing, "you just took me on a journey I never saw coming. I've been on this stage for years, talking to people, telling stories, but I never thought my words could go that far. To a movement, to kids who were about to give up." Jonathan smiled, wiping the tears from his cheek. "But they didn't, Steve, because you stood up first. And now I'm standing for them, and they'll stand for someone else. That's the power you unleashed." Steve nodded, his voice lowering. "I've been there, man. I've been that kid. Slept in my car. Thought I had nothing to give. But you, Jonathan, you made me realize none of it was for nothing. It brought me here, to this moment." Jonathan leaned forward, his eyes glowing, filled with something deeper than gratitude, conviction. "That's what I want you to understand, Steve. You didn't just overcome for yourself. You overcame for us, for everyone watching. When I look at you, I don't see a TV personality. I see a man who never quit, a man who wears that cross not for show, but because he remembers what it cost to still be here." He paused, eyes locked on Steve. "You passed that on to me, Steve, and now I'm passing it on." Steve bowed his head, one hand brushing the cross gently, like it was part of him. Then he looked up, eyes still wet, but now holding a quiet peace. "Jonathan," he said, his voice raw and shaking, "you just gave me the biggest gift of my life. I never thought I could touch someone like you. Someone so grounded, so faithful, but you make me want to do more." Jonathan nodded, his voice almost a whisper. "Then do it, Steve, because you already have. You just didn't realize it." Then suddenly Jonathan stood. "I want us to do something," he said, turning toward the audience. "Not for me, not for Steve, for them, for the young people out there who feel like they're not good enough, not strong enough, the ones who feel forgotten." He turned to Steve. "Let's stand for them." Steve looked up at him, hand still on the cross. Then without hesitation, he rose to his feet. "All right," Steve said, his voice firmer now. "Let's do it. He turned to the audience, raising a hand. Everyone, stand with Jonathan. Stand for the ones who don't feel seen, the ones barely hanging on. One by one, the crowd stood. Then row by row, the entire studio, men, women, young, old, rose not to clap, but to honor something bigger. No one cheered, no music played, just hundreds of people standing in silence. Steve looked around, eyes shimmering. You see that? He said softly to Jonathan. You just did what it took me a lifetime to learn. You brought people together. Jonathan, tears streaming down his face, smiled through the emotion. We did, Steve, because you taught me that faith isn't something you keep inside. It's something you share, and today, we're sharing it with everyone who needs it. Steve stepped closer, arms wide, and hugged Jonathan. Not a celebrity hug, a soul-to-soul embrace. Jonathan gripped him tightly, tears soaking into Steve's shoulder. The audience stood still, witnesses to a sacred exchange. Two men, two journeys, one truth. When they pulled apart, Steve looked at Jonathan, his voice rough but full of warmth. You're a gift, Jonathan. I never thought I'd be part of something like this, but you made me believe I could be. I'll never forget this moment. Jonathan's voice cracked as he responded. Neither will I, Steve, because you didn't just give me light. You gave me a family, right here, right now. They stood side by side on that stage, the room wrapped in stillness and reverence. No one sat, no one moved. The tears on Steve's face had dried, but his eyes still glowed, with understanding, with pride. Jonathan wiped his cheeks, then looked out at the crowd, filled with hope and unshakable faith. Steve took a deep breath, hand lightly resting on the cross. Folks, he said, his voice steady now, I've been on this stage for years, met all kinds of people, but today, this is the greatest gift I've ever been given. He turned to Jonathan, smiling gently. This man, Jonathan Roumie, showed me that what I say, what I believe isn't just words. It's light, it's hope, and it can change a whole generation. Jonathan stepped forward, voice soft but sure. Steve, I'm the one who should thank you. You didn't just give me the strength to stand, you gave me a purpose. And I want everyone here, everyone watching, to know that. He turned toward the camera. If Steve can make it, if I can rise again, you can too. Steve laughed, a real warm laugh. You hear him, folks? This ain't just an interview, it's a call. To every young person out there struggling, you are not alone. You are worth it. And if you're still breathing, he paused and looked around the room, hand raised. God's not done with you yet. The audience began to clap, not loud, but slow, emotional, reverent, like a heartbeat shared by hundreds of souls. Steve turned to Jonathan. I want to end today with something different. His voice dropped into something almost sacred. Let's close our eyes, not a long prayer, just a moment for the ones who need us most. Jonathan nodded. The audience fell silent again. Steve placed his hand on the cross. Jonathan closed his eyes beside him. The room was still, the lights dimmed, and for a few seconds, the entire space held its breath. Then Steve opened his eyes. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jonathan. Today, we did something beautiful. Jonathan smiled, turning to the crowd. Thank you, Steve. And thank you to all of you. Keep believing. Keep walking. Steve raised a hand in farewell. The stage lights flared one last time. And in that moment, two men, one a TV host, the other a once-lost actor, stood together as lights. Lights that would never fade. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that even in the darkest moments, a small light can change everything, then don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel and join us as we continue to share powerful stories that inspire faith, resilience, and hope. Because like Steve said, if you're still breathing, God's not done with you yet. Hit that subscribe button and let's keep spreading the light together.